Hello and welcome to a very special crossover episode of the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast with our good friends at the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. Santoki and Mashal are joining DJ and myself, Ashwin, this week. Not the best time, to be honest, to be joined by our friends from the Caribbean as they have to talk about losing 0-3 to the team India boys, who've now jumped into the number one position in the T20 rankings. But, I'll start by saying, DJ, I wasn't on last week's show. You and Varun did it alone. You predicted 2-1 to the West Indies. Varun predicted 2-1 to India, I think. And of course, both of you guys were wrong. So DJ, let me ask you before I go to our wonderful guests, how are you feeling? It's a pretty good day, right?
It's a pretty good thing to be wrong about. I mean, when your team comes out and I mean, no one would have been putting money on a 3-0 win to India. I mean, honestly, I know when I spoke to Santoki at the start, when we previewed the series, he was quite cautious about the West Indies' chances. But even the most optimistic supporter of the Indian team and even the most pessimistic supporter of the West Indian team wouldn't have said 3-0 in the T20 because they're a fantastic T20 side and we saw some good cricket. I mean, it was competitive, compelling cricket throughout. Luckily for Indian fans, we came out 3-0 and the West Indies didn't win a game on this tour, so I'm sure we'll hear all about it from Mashal and Santoki, but I'm feeling pretty happy. It's been a better February than it was a January, as I said previously.
Absolutely. So, all right, gentlemen, welcome to the show. I feel a little mean starting with the scoreline. So before we get a little bit more into the T20s, I want to talk to you a little bit about the IPL auction that just happened. And because we have you guys on the show, a little bit about the West Indies players who got picked up. So if I'm reading it correctly, 17 West Indian cricketers were picked up in the IPL auction. I mean, Masha, let me start with you. West Indies players have been a mainstay of the IPL since its inception, basically, right? How do you feel about some of the names that got picked up? I'll run through a couple of my favorites, but any surprises? Of course, Andre Russell was retained. No surprise there.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what Santoki says after I finish. So I'm gonna get in there first before Santoki exposes me. But as Santoki will well know, I had told him that I didn't care about the IPL. then when the auction came up, I was tweeting about it more than you would have thought I was the biggest IPL fanboy when the auction came up this year. But ultimately, that's because I think more than any other cricketing nation, we had 17, and you have to pay attention to that because in light of the fact that we are kind of in a transition in T20s with regards to the West Indies team, it's kind of very significant to see what I call the dawn of the new blood, really, when we look at this IPL. The 17 in IPL. Obviously, take away your Russells, your Narayans, your DJ Bravos, but we're talking about Dominic Drake's getting a deal. Alzari Joseph, I know he's been there before, getting a deal. Kyle Mayer's getting a deal. Shepherd getting a deal. Aldine Smith getting a deal. Obed McCoy getting a deal. So it's very much, I don't know if it's too much hyperbole to say this is the dawn of the new era, but it feels like it just because of how many people got picked up. And I think both I'll see what Santoki says, but I think both myself and Santoki, if I'm permitted to speak for Santoki briefly, would say that the deal which stood out more than any other was Romario Shepherd going for $1 million. And coming off this 3-0 defeat to India, I wonder if his franchise wonders what they paid $1 million for. Exactly. But that was the deal. That was the deal that stood out for me, Santoki.
Yeah, Santoki, can you tell me a little more about Shepherd? What is, not a lot to write home about in the series before our listeners who haven't seen much of him. What is it? What can the Sunrisers Hyderabad expect from the $1 million they just paid for him?
Well, like a lot of West Indians signed in the draft, he's a good finisher. He can bat if you need to chase say 30 off the last 2 overs. He's someone who can come in and swing. His bowling, though, it's been known in the Caribbean for the past few years, very inconsistent. I mean, in our regional 50-over tournament last year in the final for Guyana, he went for over 100 runs for his 10 overs. He's very inconsistent, but he had a very good CPL, and it's kind of off the back of that. I mean, to put it into context, the president of Guyana actually wrote a letter to Cricket West Indies demanding Shepherd be in the World Cup squad just because he's kind of seen as that kind of potential. But it's inconsistency, and it's kind of, as Mashal sort of suggested, it's very surprising that he did get $1 million deal in the IPL. And I feel part of that is because it's partly down to Brandon as well. IPL since its inception has been sort of defined in terms of overseas players by the likes of Gale and Bravo, and you feel franchises are trying to force a way for a new West Indian to kind of stand out in the tournament. So you feel that's why they slightly paid over the odds, hoping that he can sort of be that future all-rounder. But he's definitely someone who, batting-wise, no issues with that in terms of 20 overs. But bowling is very, very inconsistent. So I think Sunrisers are going to find that out in a very harsh way sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I'm very interesting. And I think the IPL is such a fascinating format where if your consistent streak happens to have come during the lead up to the playoffs and the playoffs, then you're a superhero. And if not, then you got dropped. But DJ, as you make yourself a cup of tea very publicly on this episode, we could see your kettle there. Let me ask you, or I hope it's tea. I don't know what else you might be drinking. It's 9 p.m. your time. But let me ask you about you. You're pretty publicly a Chennai Super Kings fan. Let me ask you about the one West Indian they chose to buy. And I think he's 40 now. Is he, how old is Dwayne Bravo? He's over the age of 40, right?
So to be clear, I'm an MS Dhoni fan, not a Chennai Super Kings fan. You might think they're the same thing, but anyway, I mean DJ Bravo, CSK on the last episode we basically spoke about how they went out and they basically got the old band back together again. They said we're going to try and get everyone back. They got Raidu back, Uthappa back, and they got DJ Bravo back. And I mean, he's been amazing for them over the years, right? With the bat, you saw what he did to the Mumbai Indians in 2018, like winning a game from nowhere, just taking all their fantastic bowlers at the death apart. Takes wickets at the death. He bowls those tough overs, 16, 18, 20. And I mean, he's fantastic. And he's done that for years and years. And he's got a great sledging game, sledging Karan Pollard, saying that he's in Yuzi Chahal's pocket. Today he was in Bishnoi's pocket. So one wristy to another. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy with that. For me, the one I'm excited about, and I'm surprised neither of you have spoken about it, is Powell. Delhi Capitals. He's coming to the Delhi Capitals. Robman Powell, what a player. What a player he is. And we spoke about him earlier,
he hit the ball
Santoki.
so hard. He hits the ball ridiculously.
Yeah. And he's going to be one of our 4 starters. He has to be, surely, at the Delhi Capitals. And man, I'm looking forward to him. He can bowl as well as a little bit, I think. So he's a good buy for us.
Yeah, Powell's obviously the one we're excited about. It was pretty interesting in that second T20 to see Rishabh Pant wicket keeping as Powell was hitting the big sixes. And in the post-match interview, he said, yeah, of course I want Team India to win, but it was pretty nice to see Powell hitting sixes because we'll be playing together here in just over a month's time. But it's a good segue into the India-West Indies series. There are two more names I want to ask you guys about in the auction. Masha, let me come to you. Jason Holder. Big jump in his value. Didn't have a great India-West Indies series, but honestly has had a phenomenal kind of past year and a half, if you will, right? Thoughts about him getting, $1.2 million almost as he went to the Lucknow Super Giants?
Well, the Lucknow Super Giants are my team, so it's all good. But
wait, what makes them your I guess they have Evan Lewis, they have Kyle Mayers, and they have Holder. Is that
listen, why? Everyone thinks I've got an issue with Jason Holder. So to show publicly that I don't, I'm now back in the Lucknow Super Giants in their inaugural season in IPL. But Holder's a funny one for me because I know I'm probably gonna get cancelled for saying this, but I still don't technically regard him yet as a T20 superstar. And it's almost like because of Jason Holder's exploits and fantastic exploits, I hasten to add, in Test cricket, not so much ODI cricket, but Test cricket. It's almost like he is talked up in T20 cricket before he's put up the T20 numbers, so to speak. Now, don't get me wrong. Obviously, he had a good IPL, very good IPL last year, and then I think he came in late in the 2021 and was good in the back end of IPL in 2020. So I'm not trying to pretend like he hasn't shown ability in T20s, but a lot of this kind of question marks came because, of course, he didn't make our World Cup squad. For the 2021 World Cup, he was part of the reserves and then was brought in after injuries and so on and so forth. He's been up and down in T20s for the West Indies. So, for example, he didn't really do much in this India series, but was excellent against England. So I don't see him as a consistent or consistently good, I should say, T20 star. However, does he deserve to be $1 million player? Yeah, probably, just because everyone kind of sees him as the number one all-rounder. irrespective of whether he is or shouldn't be seen as that in T20 cricket. World cricket kind of just sees him as the number one all-rounder. So part of me feels like, well, you know what? You deserve this $1 million for everything you've been doing in cricket in general. Whether that means he deserves $1 million for T20 or not, I don't particularly know. But I almost feel like this is a $1 million deal that he's got for all of his body of work over time. And now an IPL franchise has finally said, now you're one of our main players. And it makes sense to me that it would be a new team that would be the ones to take the punt on him rather than one of the existing sides. Although, again, maybe all three of you will say, given what he did in 2021 IPL, he deserves this just off the back of that, irrespective of everything else. I'll see what you will say about that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think my 2 cents are from the 13, 14 years, I guess, of watching the IPL. What makes a player super valuable in some situations is being able to give your captain options. And I think Jason Holder does that, right? If they lose if he's slated to bat at 6 and they lose 2 quick wickets in the third over and need to consolidate, you can send him up there to be a little stable. If you need to come in and try to get some quick runs at the finish, he can do that on his day. And then, of course, good with the new ball can be good at that. And so I think that I think you're right. Often you get the sum of money is recency bias. It's a little bit about what you've done across multi-formats, even though T20 should be the lead option. But I think just the options he gives a new skipper or a skipper for a new franchise is going to be interesting. But Santoki, let me ask you, as we talk about the series that just ended, the most expensive player in this draft, if you exclude the retention of Andre Russell, of course, was Nicholas Pooran, right? ODI skipper, arguably the only player who had a great T20 series across all 3 matches. So $1.4 million, 7.75 crores. How do you feel about that pick, right? Sunrisers Hyderabad, he's going to be playing with Romario Shepherd, who we talked about earlier. That's a great pick, right? After these 3 T20s, you got to believe he's a class player.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Pooran was in the IPL auction was definitely a case of being in the right place at the right time. I believe Sunrisers wanted to get Ishan Kishan as their first choice. When they couldn't get him, Pooran came up next as an immediate international wicketkeeper who was available for the whole tournament. So that sort of inflated his fee. But irrespective of that, as you said, this series, he scored over 60 in every match of the T20 series, which is remarkable consistency in this format. And he's someone who, at least in West Indian circles, is seen as a long-term hope for us to kind of carry us forward, especially once Pollard retires from the game. So he's someone, he can rotate strike well, he can play spin well, he can also finish an innings if needs be. So he's a very dynamic player as well as a wicket keeper. So I was surprised he got 1.4 million because considering his previous, I think he averaged under 10 last season in the IPL.
7.72. 85 runs at 7.72. I've got the stat up here. Actually, I was just googling it while you were speaking.
Yeah, so to get 1.4 million, he, as I said, it's partly down to the luck of timing as to when he came in the auction. I'm sure Quinton de Kock is kicking himself that he didn't come in at the right time. But he's someone I think he can prove fruitful for Sunrisers, just because of that versatility and his ability with the bat. And especially now they've got him tied down long term. I think we'll see in the coming seasons. Not necessarily this season. I think he'll do well, but over the next 2-3 seasons, he's someone who will definitely be a star for them.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's going to be interesting to see where he's used in the batting order. I think he's gone to a franchise that otherwise I don't think has a great team. So it'll be interesting to see how he kind of helps them elevate and get to the playoffs if that's their goal. But DJ, let's talk about the T20s now, right? Let's start with the first one. I'm going to start with you and ask you a little about the India selection, right? It feels like on paper the batting order of Rohit and Kishan, followed by Kohli at 3, Pant at 4, Sky at 5, and Venkatesh Iyer at 6 is your dream top 6. Is that fair to say?
Yep, I quite like that Kishan and Rohit opening partnership right on top. Obviously, it hasn't proved as successful as I would have hoped. I think I went on record last week saying this guy Kishan at 15.25 crores should play every T20 game India plays. But yes, I think left hand, right hand on top. Kohli followed by Pant, Sky, and Venki Iyer or Hardik Pandya. That's a pretty solid top 6 for me. Of course, you've got to think about where Rahul and Iyer fit into that. The Shreyas Iyer, not Venki Iyer. And how you fit Hardik in when he's fit. So, good problem to have, but really, really good top 6.
And then on the bowlers, really quick, obviously we played Bumrah's rested this series, so Bhuvi and Chahar, kind of like for like. We've talked about how they're you likely won't play both of them ongoing, but Harshal Patel, no questions about his T20 chops. And then a debut for Ravi Bishnoi. How did you feel about that one?
He looked nervous, right? In the first game, he looked like he was a guy playing his first international game. He bowled a bunch of wides, but then when he settled in, you saw him come into his own. That he got that googly going, and he bowled really well. He bowled really well in his first game. I thought he was very impressive. He bowled well in the next games as well. Next 2 games as well. Actually, he played all 3. I was surprised that we didn't play either Siraj or Avesh in the first game. And as you said, we played Bhuvi and Chahar in the first game, who kind of pretty similar. No Shardul playing in the first game as well. So I would have thought that Deepak Chahar and Shardul are fighting out for one spot, and then Bhuvi, Harshal, Bhuvi, Avesh and Siraj are fighting out for one spot once Bumrah comes back. It was fascinating. It was good to see us trying out different players. Interesting, we played 2 leggies. I didn't expect us to play 2 leg spinners. Chahal and Bishnoi both played. I would have thought one of those 2 would play, but clearly someone's identified an issue with wrist spin and deployed both of those guys in the first game and the second.
Yeah, I mean, Bishnoi ended with 4 overs, 2 for 17, despite 6 wides. The only player who had better figures than him was actually West Indies' Roston Chase, right? So despite coming up in a loss, Marshall, I'm going to ask you, because we got some questions from some of our listeners on Twitter. Cricket Clinic and Karthik KO Cricket have both said, is Roston Chase the biggest positive for West Indies coming out of the series? I mean, first match 4 overs, 2 for 14. He picked up both openers, Rohit and Kishan. Like, he looked pretty good, but he wasn't picked up in the IPL. I don't even know if he was in the auction draft, or tell me a little bit more about Roston Chase.
Yeah, so Roston went unsold in the IPL and auction, rightly so, I hasten to add. Listen, would I have ever had Roston Chase playing in any of these T20s? No, probably not. Do I think Roston Chase should be in our T20 side? Actually, no, probably not. Has he taken his chance? 100%. And at the end of the day, and Kyron Pollard kind of alluded to it in the post-match press conference after the third T20 defeat. And he said that, listen, Roston came in for Jason in game 1 because Jason was injured. And all you can ask a player to do when they get a chance is make yourself undroppable. And technically, coming out of this series, Roston has given West Indies a selection issue, because myself, and again, I'll speak for Santoki because I know he agrees with me on this, Roston Chase with the bat has been atrocious in all formats. In all formats of the game. He's not offering us anything with the bat. Let's try and equate it maybe to someone like Moeen Ali when his batting fell off. Right now, Roston seems to be more of a bet with us with the ball than he is with the bat, even though the bat's what should be getting him into the side. So where West Indies now have to consider with someone like a Roston Chase, but bear in mind the World Cup's in Australia as well, which further complicates this. But what they have to consider with someone like a Roston Chase is, what are we picking him to do? Are we picking him to bowl his 4 overs, which if we are, where are we batting him then? Because he's not a top... His performance doesn't justify him batting anywhere in the top 5 at all. But we seem reluctant to put him down at number 10 or number 11 to reflect the fact that he's only really contributing with the ball. So it's a really weird scenario we find ourselves in, which we'll still probably be having this conversation in the Caribbean when England turn up for the test series if he somehow gets into the test squad. I don't know if India have an equivalent type of player where, like, actually you're not contributing in the primary suit you're supposed to be picked for, and it just poses selection problems when they start contributing in a way that they shouldn't be contributing, if that makes sense.
We had it with Rahane in the test game when he wasn't contributing with the bat, but he was going to be our captain. I can't think of anyone else.
We've also had it with our bowlers a little, right? Like for a while when Deepak Chahar wasn't bowling at his peak, he was batting great. Shardul wasn't bowling great, but batting phenomenally. Ashwin was batting phenomenally. So it's been a little bit weird, but I hear that. That's going to be an interesting one. Santoki, I wanted to just kind of ask you about kind of things that worked and didn't work for West Indies, but let me kind of start by learning a little more about the openers, right? First 2 matches was Kyle Mayers and Brandon King. They dropped King. I think they brought in Hope to open in this third match that happened today at the time of us recording it. So what is the long-term kind of plan for the West Indies opening pair in T20s?
So long term, we're just hoping Evan Lewis can kind of come back, and he's sort of, I mean, if anything, this series just sort of valued his importance to the side. Brandon King is someone, he had an excellent 2019 CPL. Before that, he was kind of earmarked as a Red Bull player, but CPL kind of took him off into a different route. He made the West Indies squad 2020 and then didn't really hit form, was dropped, has kind of worked his way back into the side, had a decent series against Pakistan. But again, here we saw in the second T20 him play a match-losing innings, 22 runs off 30 balls, which when you're chasing 180 plus is, you might as well retire out or do something, because then you're just letting the team down. Carl Mayers is an interesting one because he's sort of the England series. He came in for the last 2 games. He sort of managed to put together a blistering innings, but we've seen him struggle against India. So we haven't seen enough of him as an opener to suggest that he could be a long-term solution. So it's a case of who can manage to partner with Evan Lewis. I think Shai Hope and Brandon King aren't necessarily the answers for us at the moment. So it's hard to know, unless if Carl Mayers doesn't step up, it's hard to know where we're kind of getting options for. I know Sunil Narine has been tearing up in the Bangladesh Premier League as an opener, so that could always be an option. But realistically, I think we're hoping that Lewis and Mayers can kind of gel together long term.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, right? And losing, losing the early wicket in a T20 is always gonna put you back a little bit. But Marshall, then let me ask you kind of, put it bluntly, what went wrong for the West Indies this time around, right? It was great cricket, right? First match, you guys batted first. Always tough to put a total on the board. We know the team chasing benefits, but then the second and third match, India made 186 and 184, which are tough but chaseable. In both cases, got fairly close. You'd say at about the 17 over mark. It still felt doable, but West Indies wasn't quite able to get over the line. So how would you kind of sum up, or what's your assessment on what went wrong, or what the West Indies think tank needs to go back and do?
Yeah, I think there's two main areas here that the West Indies think tank needs to go away and look at. Santoki's already alluded to one, which is we cannot overstate enough how big of a miss Evan Lewis is. I mean, we're talking about a world-class white ball opener that lots of sides would want in their international setup. So we're kind of hodgepodging it together at this moment in time with regards to a blistering start, and that sets you back. When you're chasing, we had to chase in the second and the third, and didn't get off to a good enough flyer from the openers. That's issue number one, and then issue number two is actually something I'm gonna back up something that again Pollard alluded to in kind of the post-series press conference. He said that we had India where we wanted them in all 3 games up until about the 15th over. And I think that's fair. I think that's a fair enough assessment. Even in game 1, like as much as India chased it with like 6 balls to go, there was a point in it was like, okay, this is a bit tighter than expected, given we only put up 157. And then in the chasing games, when India were batting first, on both occasions, there were points in India's innings where it's like, okay, we got them here. We got them. Even today, there was a point until Surya and, was it Iyer who put together the match-winning partnership? There was a point until those two started. It was like, wait a minute, India are going to get less than 160 here. That's what it looked like. So Pollard's point was, up until about the 15th over of every match, yeah, you could argue it was a much closer series than a straight out and out 3-0. But at the back end, repeatedly, we had no death bowling to speak of, and it culminated in today's game where we let 91 runs go in the last 6 overs. Now, as good as Surya is and Iyer, come on, that's ridiculous against anybody. That's ridiculous. And Dominic Drakes and Romaro Shepherd were getting just taken apart all over. So. And even in game 2, I remember saying it in game 2 as well, you have to sometimes, yes, the batting's great and it looks great because 6s are being hit everywhere. But sometimes you have to look and go, hold on, how bad is this bowling? And I just think that our bowling at the back end, and go back to the mention of CSK, we've lost Dwayne Bravo. That's a big, big hole to fill. We don't have a death bowler like Dwayne Bravo anymore. And Obed McCoy, who's injured, we don't have him. So at the back end, we are struggling to have accurate and almost like a banker, someone can come in and grab a wicket or only go for, 7 runs repetitively up at the back end. So that's where I think we really need to go away and have a look and see what we can do about that.
Yeah, very interesting. I think lots to work on. Not a ton of cricket left before the World Cup, but just about enough to be able to finesse this. Santoki, let me ask you on a more positive note. What were some of the highlights coming out of this? Like, what are things you were pretty happy about from the West Indies standpoint that you're looking forward to them focusing on as we get into the World Cup? And kind of where does West Indies cricket go from here?
Yeah, so we talked about him earlier, but Nicholas Pooran obviously was a highlight. He's someone who's been inconsistent, but he managed to put together 3 excellent innings. And his Rothman Powell as well. Rothman Powell, he's someone who's just worked his way back into the West Indies side. So it was good to see his batting. As you said, big sixes. Vishwa Pant behind the wicket was in awe of him. He just looked like a world-class player. So for me, there weren't many positives to take from this. Playing India in India is always going to be tough, but Pooran and Rothman Powell working together showed that we do have quality in the middle order. And then, as we mentioned before, Roston Chase sort of made himself undroppable with coming into the side and taking the wickets and keeping the economy down as he did. So those were the main positives. In terms of going forward, I think we just need key personnel back. So Michelle mentioned Obed McCoy. He's vital, someone to come in at the death overs, because death bowling is an art form, and you feel like the likes of Shepherd and Dominic Drake, they sort of still need a lot more experience in that regard. So Obed McCoy coming back, Evan Lewis as well, will be much needed to come in the top of the order. But as you said, there's not a lot of time left before the World Cup. Not many games coming up for us in the T20 format. So we're gonna have to get things together pretty quickly before the World Cup starts in October.
Marshall, before we wrap this section, I let you go. How much of the World Cup squad is going to be decided based on how good an IPL those 17 players have?
I kind of feel like the IPL 17, that almost is our World Cup squad. If you really and truly, if you think about it, and as Santoki says, given how little time is remaining, I think we've got Bangladesh in June and July, South Africa after that, and I think that's pretty much it. We might be able to sneak in something after South Africa, but basically our World Cup squad, I don't think it's not going to be like. I'm not convinced they're going to leave it to CPL, which is just before the World Cup, to suddenly go, right, that player has suddenly performed in CPL, in you come. There would have to be a huge gap missing in the team to wait till August and September and CPL to suddenly find someone. So I think a lot of eyes will be looking at the IPL, and the IPL performances will form the bulk of who we then take to play against Bangladesh and South Africa in the summer series.
Right. Lots to look forward to. IPL coming soon. I'm reading a report today that the broadcasters have requested the IPL start on March 26th. So that's just over a month away, and February is a short month. So we may be 32, 33 days out from the IPL, which of course we are very excited about. I think that's going to bring us to a wrap. Gentlemen, the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, can you tell our listeners really quickly where they can find you all?
Yeah, so I always get this wrong. So you know what? This is the easiest way to do it. Go to www.caribbeancricketpodcast.com. Go to the website, because I finally realized that all of the links are actually on the website. So just go there, and that will take you to all the different Instagram, YouTube, Twitter pages, etc., etc. And thank you so much for having us on.